All right, we are back at it. Vocabulary Marathon Part 2. And I know how excited you are to go even more in depth on federalism since it's your favorite thing. So let's dive right into it. I just clicked on an emoji. There we go. All right. So, as you know, federalism is power divided and shared between the different levels of government. But there are four main types of federalism that kind of combine itself to create this overall definition. And those four types of federalism are what we are going to go over in this section. So the first one is devolution. And definition is the transfer of power to a lower level of federalism. This is most common in going from the federal government to state governments. And we're going to talk later, actually, in the next video, about how, practically speaking, devolution is actually done. But essentially, devolution occurs most often when the federal government no longer wants to assume responsibility for something. This could be ideological, right? It could be because the president and or Congress thinks that whatever topic is relevant here should not be a federal issue. It should be a state issue. So it could be ideological, or it could also be a money thing, right? It could be, this is not something we want to spend our money on, so the state should take care of it instead. So whatever the case may be, devolution is when the federal government would transfer power to the state governments. And something that you need to know for the AP test is that the president who essentially championed devolution, they ran on a platform of devolution, and then while they were president, they devolved a lot of things, is Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan was president during the 80s, and he is like the king, so to speak, of devolution. So an example that you would need to know is Ronald Reagan's welfare reform. So essentially, prior to the 1980s, the federal government was totally responsible for welfare programs. So when I say welfare programs, I mean programs that kind of attempt to boost up the lower economic quintile. So things like SNAP, which is like food stamps, right? Social Security, Medicaid, all of these things are welfare programs. And Ronald Reagan essentially said, states, this is kind of up to you now. So you decide who's eligible and you roll out the programs. So instead of the federal government being solely responsible, they now kind of work with the states in a funding sense to make welfare happen. So the states now have their own criteria for who is eligible for these programs, how much money or service that they would get based on these programs. The states have a lot more say now. So devolution is something that the anti-federalists would really support. They would say the federal government needs to give a lot of their powers to the states. So devolution and the anti-federalists and their sentiment kind of go hand in hand. The next type of federalism is dual federalism. And that is the theory that each level of federalism should have distinct jobs and they should not overlap or interact with one another. So the federal government does their thing, the states do their thing, and the local government does their thing, and that's it. So when we say that power is divided and shared, the division comes from the aspects of dual federalism. And dual federalism, you may see it on the AP test denoted as layer cake federalism. I just want to prepare you for both. Dual federalism is the term that you will that I'm like 80% sure you're going to see. But in the past, it has been also known as layer cake federalism. I will make that make sense in a second. So basically, dual federalism is made possible by the 10th Amendment. It's saying anything that is not in the Constitution is given to the states, and anything that's in the Constitution is given to the federal government. And those guys just got to do their thing and leave each other alone. So that's kind of the theory here. And the reason it's called layer cake federalism. So if you think about a layer cake, right, it would have, like in this case, it would have like a layer of, I guess that would be, what is that, strawberry? And then maybe a layer of chocolate. And then on top, you've got frosting. And those layers do not combine with one another. They're distinctly different. So when you think dual federalism, think layer cake. And some examples, these I'm sure you're already familiar with, so I won't belabor them too much. But like, for example, states are responsible for schools and the federal government is responsible for war. States deal with intra-state commerce or commerce within their state, whereas the federal government deals with interstate commerce or commerce between the states, etc. Obviously feel free to look over the rest of these, but I'm sure you already are aware of them because we've gone over these. Moving on. Next one would be cooperative federalism, and that is exactly what it sounds like. So it's basically the theory that each level of federalism should cooperate with one another because they, kind of deal with the same issues anyway, most of the time. And they should work together to accomplish the tasks as easily and as efficiently as possible. And when you have the definition of power being divided and shared, the shared aspect comes from cooperative federalism. So dual federalism, divided, D, right? You can remember that. And then cooperation, sharing, right? Cooperative federalism, power is shared. Now, since apparently the College Board loves cake, cooperative federalism is also known as marble cake federalism. I don't know, again, exactly what term you're going to see. You're probably going to see cooperative federalism, but just in case, marble cake federalism is another term for this. And cooperative federalism, and honestly devolution as well, is made possible by the term fiscal federalism. And we will get to fiscal federalism in the next video. That's what the entire video is actually about. So you've got your federal, you got your state, you got your local, and in a marble cake, all of those different flavors in the cake kind of mix together. So, they cooperate essentially to produce one flavor. So cooperative federalism, marble cake, same deal there. So fiscal federalism is the next term that we're going to go into. I said I was going to do the next video, but honestly, this video is not that long. So let's just roll on through. This might make the video, a little bit unbearably long for you guys, but at least we'll knock out two different parts, right? So fiscal federalism is carried out through grants and aid. And let me actually go back here so we can go over this definition. So fiscal federalism is an aspect of cooperative federalism where funding is given to the states by the federal government in order to basically get them to do what the federal government wants. So, it's not exactly quote unquote cooperation, but it is nice to have funding to do the things you want to do, right? So they are, in a sense, working together. So fiscal federalism is done through, quote, grants in aid. And grants in aid come in a variety of flavors. We've got block grants, categorical grants, matching grants, and then unfunded mandates. And we're going to go over all four of those. So grants in aid operate based on this theory of the carrot and the stick. Maybe you have heard of this in your economics class, because this is certainly used in economics. It's also used in business as a theory on how to run a company. But basically, carrot and stick theory is this. So the carrot is a metaphor for a benefit or a reward for doing something good. And the stick is bad. it's a punishment. So like think of like a sharp stick that you would like get poked with or something if you don't do what you're supposed to do. So carrots are good, sticks are bad, and your definition is essentially grants, because we're talking about grants and aid, and a grant, for the record, a grant is a chunk of money given to you by the government. So grants function as carrots. So states want grants, states want money. That is a carrot to them. It is a benefit or a reward. So grants are carrots, and essentially the threat of losing funding or missing out on funding is the stick. So either less money or more money, right? The stick or the carrot. So to talk about these 4 types of grants in aid, the first type is block grants. So block grants are grants that are given from the federal government to the states, and the states can use that money however they want to. So block grants are basically like a check that's just given to a state, and it's like, you know, congratulations, go spend it. You know, don't spend it all in one place, right? States love block grants. States prefer block grants to all of the other different types of grants and aid because the federal government just says, you know, here's some money, have fun. So, you know, who doesn't love that, right? States definitely do. And block grants are often given to states as a reward for the state complying with something that the federal government wants them to do. So if the federal government, you know, passes a law and they say, all right, states, you got to implement this, you know, maybe some of the states resist. So the federal government says, well, we're going to give money to the folks that did, you know, do what we wanted them to do. And then everyone's like, oh, snap, they're giving out grants now? I should probably do that. So block grants are often given as a reward, not always, but that's an effective way to use grants. So block grants are a big carrot, right? They're just saying, hey, here's a big benefit for you. Here's a reward for doing what we want you to do. An example of a block grant, and this isn't something you have to know for the AP test, right? It's not bolded, it's not underlined. Don't worry about, you know, memorizing this, but I do want to give an example so that way, you know, maybe it makes more sense. So a very, I guess, famous block grant would be the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Block Grant. And that is given through the Department of Health and Human Services. So basically, states who expand their services to at-risk Americans, such as like, you know, maybe pregnant teenagers or like really, you know, like poor homeless people, something like that. States who go out of their way to put services together to help those various people with their health care, they will get a block grant from this program. So each year, if you produce results and you say, hey, you know, maybe we decreased teen pregnancy by 10% this year, or the homeless folks are maybe there's a decrease in heroin use or something amongst the homeless population. Whatever the case may be, there's some criteria that the states have to comply with, and if they do, they get a block grant. So states are going to go out of their way to try and accomplish these tasks, and the federal government will basically give them money. If you've ever played a video game, sometimes you're given a task, and then when you complete the task, the person's like, nice job, here's some money. That's basically how block grants work. They're like, go out and do this thing, and then once you did it, come back, tell me how it went, and I'll give you some cash. So block grants are what the states love. Categorical grants are like not as nice. So categorical grants are grants from the federal government that are given to the states for them to use for a specific purpose. And that purpose is determined by the federal government. So block grants are just a blank check. It's like, you did it, here's the money, like spend it on whatever you want. Categorical grants are for a specific category. right? That's a way to remember that. So categorical grants are grants from the government that you have to use for a specific thing. The reason for this is that states have to maintain a balanced budget. The federal government is in a lot of debt. I mean, I think we're in like $27 trillion of debt right now. We go up another $1 million in debt like every 30 seconds. So the federal government can go into debt, but the states cannot. They have to maintain a balanced budget. So if the federal government needs the states to do something specific, the federal government usually is going to need to pay for it. And that's how categorical grants work. Now, I will say this too, if the federal government's going to pay for something, that also means they're going to make sure it's done right. So if you get a categorical grant, you're also going to have federal oversight that goes along with that grant. So the states, maybe have to implement the program that the federal government wants, and they have to implement it exactly how the federal government wants them to. And the federal government's going to make sure they do it right, since, they're paying for it. So categorical grants are a carrot, but it's like half a carrot, because you have to use it for a specific thing, and you got all these, feds all over the place making sure you don't screw it up. So yeah, not as much of a carrot as a block grant. An example of categorical grants, thanks to Ronald Reagan, right, we already talked about him, would be the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, or also known as the Food Stamp Program. So the federal government benefits from a healthy workforce, right? If everyone in the United States is like healthy and strong, then the economy is going to be better because you've got all these, good workers. So basically, the federal government gives categorical grants to states each year for food stamps. And the states would then determine who gets food stamps, and then they would administer the food stamps to those people. The federal government would make sure that the states have a reasonable qualification for who gets food stamps, right? You can't just give it to like nobody, because that would be a waste of federal dollars. So there is federal oversight on this, even though it's technically up to the states to distribute these food stamps. So again, it's like half a carrot, because the states don't really get to do what they want with the money. And sometimes food stamps obviously is something that's necessary and that's objectively good. But sometimes categorical grants are for things that states don't want to do. So half a carrot, I feel like, is a fair equation. Moving on to matching grants. So we've already covered block grants. Block grants, right, are just money for whatever the states want to do. Categorical grants, money for a specific thing. Matching grants, we're kind of getting less and less in the amount that states prefer these. Matching grants are grants for from, that says for, I apologize, from the federal government that match the amount of money that states pay for a specific purpose. Ooh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to see how many people wrote for when they turn in their assignment. Please change that to from. I made a typo. So basically, the federal government, the state government go halvesies, if you will. So it's kind of like when you go to Taco Bell and you order $10 of stuff, and you and your buddy are there, and then you cash app them $5. That's how this works, basically. So if the federal government wants something done, but they don't want to pay for the whole thing, they can say, all right, states, we'll match $1 for $1. You pay $1 million towards this, we'll give you another $1 million. So we'll call it $2 million. If the project costs $2 million, you only have to pay $1 million. So you only have to pay half, basically. So matching grants are a carrot, but it's like a quarter of a carrot, because if you don't do the thing the government says, the federal government says, you get no money. And if you do it, the federal government will only pay half. And because the federal government has, their money, their skin in the game, there's going to be federal oversight to make sure that you're doing it right. So not only do you have feds sniffing around, but you also have to pay your own money towards it. And if you just don't do it, you don't get any money at all. So matching grants are kind of a bummer for states, but it's also kind of helpful because you're still getting some money from the federal government. An example of this, and again, this is not something you need to know, it's not bold and underlined. An example would be the Office of Refugee Resettlement Matching Grant Program. And that is something that's done through the Department of Health and Human Services. Basically, for every dollar spent by a state to settle a refugee into a home, right? A refugee is someone who had to leave the country that they used to live in because it was either unsafe or, maybe they lived in like an island and then the ocean levels rose or something and they didn't have a house anymore. Whatever the case may be, they were forced to leave their old country and then they came to the United States and we got to, put them somewhere. So every dollar spent by a state to settle refugees into their state, the federal government will match that amount of money. So if the states spend, maybe the state of Arkansas spends $10 million rehousing refugees. The federal government will give the state of Arkansas an additional $10 million. So now Arkansas has $20 million to spend specifically for this purpose. Okay, last one. We've got unfunded and or federal mandates. So this is the same term, unfunded mandate, federal mandate, same thing. And we're talking with marble cake federalism and stuff like that. That was you're probably not going to get that term, but I want to tell you it anyway. With this term, unfunded mandates and federal mandates, they're the exact same thing. And we're talking 50-50 chance that you see one of these or the other. Genuinely don't know which one the AP could throw at you. They have thrown both in the same test before. So I want you to be prepared for both. So basically, an unfunded mandate is exactly what it sounds like. And it comes from the federal government. So it's a federal mandate. Both terms make sense, but I don't want you to get confused because there's two of them, right? So do your best to keep this straight in your mind. So basically, it's a mandate that the states have to do what the federal government says, or else they're going to be punished. They're going to take away funding that would normally go toward something else. So, we'll go over examples in a second. So states have to pay the entire cost of complying with a federal mandate. So it's completely unfunded, and the states have to do the whole thing. And like we already said, states have to balance their budget. States cannot go into debt. So unfunded mandates are a huge bummer for states. And on top of that, if they don't comply, they get punished by losing even more funding. So unfunded mandates are a huge bummer for states, but it's fantastic for the federal government because they just get to order people around. So basically it's done to get states who disagree with a federal law to comply with it. That is usually when these happen. Not always, but usually. And the example we're going to go over actually has nothing to do with non-compliance, or at least this first example. It has nothing to do with non-compliance. It's just a straight up unfunded mandate. The other example that we will go over is something where the states did not do what the federal government wanted. But as you can probably already guess, this is a big stick. So if the states don't do it, they get poked with the stick, right? It's something that they don't like. They get their funding taken away. So no carrots here, strictly sticks. An unfunded mandate that you need to know. It is bolded, underlined, and italicized. I am not here to play with you today. We're talking super important. This is definitely going to be on your test. It's probably going to be a multiple choice question. The answer is going to be unfunded mandate. And the question is going to have something to do with the Americans with Disabilities Act. But in case it's the other way around, let's talk about what this law does. So here's your definition. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires all public spaces, such as businesses and crosswalks, to be accessible to handicapped individuals. So I feel like I framed unfunded mandates in like a negative way, especially because like it is objectively a stick, but unfunded mandates can also be used for good purposes. And in this case, this is an important thing. Like it's a good unfunded mandate. It's important that people who, for example, are in a wheelchair are able to go to public spaces, right? That's just an objectively good thing. So states, they had to redo all their crosswalks. If you've ever noticed how the crosswalk like slopes downwards, like there's no curb there, it's just like a little incline down into the road. That's because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It used to be, there was a curb everywhere, but now you've got at the crosswalks a little slope. So states had to redo that. They had to put wheelchair ramps in all of their public buildings. They had to, our school, for example, has elevators because we don't have a wheelchair ramp. So that way people can get to the second floor. All kinds of construction had to be done to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you did not comply, you would get your funding cut towards other things. So it was very important that the states complied with this. And on top of that, when it came to businesses historically have not done what the law tells them to do very quickly. They just don't do it because they have to make a profit. And if they're spending money, then they're not making money, right? So the states ended up having to write grants of their own to businesses to get the businesses up to code so that way they could comply with the federal mandate. So this was a big deal. It happened in the night, I believe this was passed in 1970. But basically what you need to know is that the Americans with Disabilities Act was an unfunded mandate where the states had to basically get wheelchair accessible. And it costs money, but again, it's money for a good purpose. Second example, so remember I told you that these also happen when states are not in compliance. This is an example of that. So the 21st Amendment legalized alcohol. So this is the only amendment that got rid of another amendment, which is kind of weird. The 18th Amendment made alcohol illegal. But then the 21st Amendment said, just kidding, it is legal. So everybody that is 21 and up can drink alcohol now. The problem is that it's up to the states, according to this amendment, it's up to the states to determine what the drinking age would be. It had to be at least 21, but it could be higher. So the 21st Amendment said, all right, states, you got to make alcohol legal. And then there was a bunch of states that were like, screw you, we don't want to make alcohol legal. So all the states that did not comply, the federal government was like, okay, we're just going to not maintain your highways anymore, and we're not going to build new ones. And any ones that were in the middle of constructing, we're just going to leave them. So I think the last state to comply with the 21st Amendment was Mississippi, and it was in like the 1960s. So they went a really long time without legalizing alcohol, but they finally did it, and now Mississippi has highways again, which is exciting for them. So basically, this is a perfect example of an unfunded mandate. They said, you've got to make alcohol legal, and if you don't, we're going to poke you with the stick. We're going to take away your highway funding. Okay, I know I extended the video. I apologize if this was too long, but I also kind of don't because you would have had to learn it anyway. So do me a favor and turn in your assignment in its current state. You should be done with the first 20 terms. So do me a favor, turn in that document with the first 20 terms all finished. And when we come back, we will discuss the bureaucracy. Is it the fourth branch of government? That's up to you. I will catch you guys in a minute.